Christopher here, Forklift Theology. 2 videos in one night, not something I normally do. Too much work. So what's this video about? Well, it's about a cult. A separatist group. A group of people whom I regard as racist. Now, how can I even say that? Well, if you follow this channel for any length of time, certainly you've seen my DNA video and my DNA update video. So, I'm leaning in on my genetic heritage as both Native American and West African. Though both of those are only at 1%, so honestly it's not a lot to go on. And I'll be the first to admit to it. But it is what it is, and it's enough that I'm going to be able to legitimately call a spade a spade. Now, you spend enough time dealing in theology, you will hear about all sorts of religions. There's Zoroastrianism, which likes to claim itself the first monotheistic religion. I haven't really looked into it much. Maybe someday. I'm not going to dispute their claims one way or the other at the moment. You've got animalism, which is a little weird. I'm just going to say it, it's a little weird. You've got the worship of the Nordic gods. Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, Odin did say he was going to get rid of the frost giants, and there are none. But maybe there never were, and thus it never mattered. Religion gets tricky at times, I'll say it. And even then, there are some groups out there that I just gotta shake my head. Now, certainly we are all familiar with Atlantis. Yeah, Atlantis. Now, most of us, when we think of Atlantis, we think of one of 3 things. You got Plato's whole The Republic with Atlantis, which they became extremely hedonistic, and the gods got kind of ticked off over that and overthrew them. Okay, there's that Atlantis. You've got the Disney Atlantis. That's a little bit of a weird one for me. I've seen it. I've seen the sequel. A little weird, but okay. Not the end of the world type stuff. Then you got Stargate Atlantis. Oh, and for copyright purposes, these are only being mentioned. I'm not going into any real detail here. That said, okay, whatever. We can work with these. What I can't work with is what I'm about to say. What if I told you there's a religion that is largely a splinter off of Islam? They have a considerably smaller Quran. 5 a.m. And this is where it gets weird. Now, first of all, they claim that they're descendants of the ancient Moabites. But they claim the ancient Moabites ruled over northwest and southwest Africa. Now, the group I'm aware of, most of this particular religion, claims that they ruled over Atlantis before the great earthquake which created the Atlantic Ocean. And this means that they believe, and I say they believe, I don't follow this to save my life, that Africa once extended all the way from, well, where Mombasa, Kenya sits, a place that I've been, clearing out to Seattle, Washington. Yeah, right. I think somebody needs a lesson on plate tectonics. Earthquakes don't create overnight oceans. Not like that. Now, we could get into the whole thing with Noah's flood here, but not really. Because by the time Noah's flood was over with, the Atlantic Ocean would have been well established. Plain and simple. However, this group also has some other claims. They don't believe in heaven or hell, which really makes me wonder what happens when one dies. Because they don't have a heaven or a hell. Sounds to me like you live this life and that's it. Which means the only thing you have is a hope for this life. If that's the case, as the Apostle Paul says, to be most pitied. That said, they also believe in something else that's kind of crazy. They believe they have a flag. Yeah, a flag. Now, a lot of churches have flags. And quite frankly, I wish they'd keep them out of the sanctuary. Put them in the narthex or foyer, whatever you want to call it. Keep it out of the sanctuary. The sanctuary is God's holy place. Keep the sanctuary clean. Come on, people. But that said, they have a flag. It is red with a green 5-pointed star for each of their 5 principles, or 5 values, depending upon who you talk to. A red flag with a star in the center of it usually means something else, but we're not going to get into that. But it's political. That said, they claim their flag is over 10,000 years old. That would put their flag right around the time of Göbekli Tepe, possibly the oldest known human city. But this becomes problematic and fast. Now, you may have noticed that I have no Bible verses today. I'm running purely on history here. Yeah, history. Now, the Christian faith, as well as the Jewish faith, they do something very dangerous when it comes to being a religion. They tie themselves to actual historic events. Things that we can actually look at and say, did this happen? And overwhelmingly, yes. In fact, there was a recent news article about yet another find in the Holy Land proving the Old Testament. Interesting find, too. I'll leave a link in the description below. That said, what of this 10,000-year-old flag? Well, historically, the earliest known flag I can find comes from around 850 AD, and it seems to be, if I remember right, Denmark. That's hardly 10,000 years. But it gets worse. Much, much worse. Now, for a religion of any sort to have a flag of over 10,000 years, you would think that they'd have some sort of reference outside of, in this case, their so-called prophet, the noble Drew Ali. And they claim, of course, that if the prophet is wrong, the temple is wrong. I'm going to say it. Sorry guys, your prophet's wrong here. In fact, I'm about to prove it. Because I've got history. Now, to start with, these guys, this organization, this religion, they do something that frustrates most Christians. They don't consider sources outside of themselves. They are their own authority, which also means they fabricate a lot of their own evidence. That's bothersome. Whereas Christians, we tend to embrace hostile sources. For instance, Christians don't shy away from people like Dionysus. We don't shy away from Tacitus. We don't shy away from Pliny the Younger. These are all reasonably hostile sources to the Christian faith. They're outside sources. We don't shy away from them. This group, they shy away from outside sources. Under the Christian umbrella, we have fringe groups. Two of them are very, very hesitant to accept outside sources. They are their own authority. We have a word for this. It's called confirmation bias. You create your own sources that you accept, and that's all you'll accept. Thus, what you accept confirms what you already believe. And because it came from within, you have nothing to prove it wrong. This doesn't work well. And this group that I'm talking about, they're doing the same thing. They only accept their own sources. So, the fact that we don't have any Akkadian records of them, we don't have any Sumerian records of them, we don't have any Egyptian records of them, we don't have any Ethiopian records of them, and that's about to get interesting in a moment. Nor do we even have any Akkadian records of them. I mean, come on. And these are some of the oldest civilizations in history. And they make no record whatsoever of this flag or of this group reigning over these sections of Africa. You would think that if this were true, there'd be a record of it. I got a half dozen archaeology books. They don't show any of this. I looked. And some of these archaeology books are not written by Christians. They're written by, you guessed it, evolutionists. I'm not afraid of a hostile source. That said, now what? Well, like I said, this gets interesting. You see, these guys also have some other statements. And this is where the racism starts to come into play here. Now, I've heard them very openly say they don't want anyone who is not of African descent or dark-skinned. Basically, no white guys, is what they say. I find that unacceptable. Because, quite frankly, what did we go through here in the United States for? To segregate people? Really? I don't think so. We fought segregation in the United States. We actually brought National Guardsmen in to desegregate schools. This is a total reverse of that. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look into it. Seriously. Now, these guys I'm talking about, they have some claims about all of this. Now, to start with, they talk heavily about slavery here in the United States. And their claims are odd, to say the least. They claim that it was, quote, white people who gave them the terms of Negro, black, colored, and Yep, Ethiopian. You know, I would love to hear Ethiopia's take on that one. Because Ethiopia's been around for a very, very, very long time. In fact, in the Bible, and like I said, I don't have scripture references per se, but there's an incident in scripture, in the Holy Bible, that really disproves the whole Ethiopian name. And it was because the disciple Philip, who, well, he's an interesting character, but he found himself in a situation where he saw an Ethiopian eunuch reading the prophet Isaiah. And the Lord prompted Philip to talk to the eunuch. Now, I'm going to tell you, most people have more problems with the idea of a eunuch than they do with an Ethiopian. Why is that? I don't really have a good answer. The idea makes me uncomfortable, I'll be honest, but I don't have a good answer otherwise. So, Ethiopian eunuch. Ethiopian. And this was about 2,000 years ago. Long before the so-called prophet of this group came along. Something doesn't add up, does it? And if you're of a rational mind, yeah, you would agree something doesn't sound right. And that's because it's not. Also, and let's be honest here, language is a tricky creature, is it not? We have a lot of words in our language that are, in terms of world history, reasonably new. Now, the English language as a whole has only been around for about maybe 1,400 years. And that's pushing it to say that. I'd hazard it's not quite that long. Closer to about maybe 1,100 years is my opinion. And that's because anything resembling what we might call English doesn't really start to take off until around 700. In 600 you have Gothic, which is a Proto-Germanic language. It's going to be a while before you get to something that begins to resemble what we consider to be English. 700, 800, you start to see hints. 900 is when it starts to really get interesting. The earliest that we can recognize and have any hope of reading is around 1250. And most Americans, they can't even read 1611. And I don't mean, by the way, 1611 as you see it in the bookstore. Oh, yeah. I'll put a link in the description below. I'll just tell you right now, most of you who use the King James Bible and claim you're using the 1611, you're not. What you're really using is a lot closer to the 1599 Geneva, but a little bit more pro-Roman Catholic, whereas Geneva is somewhat decidedly anti-Roman Catholic. So, I'm just saying that, though, for one simple purpose. To point out that language has a way of changing. And that's something that this group doesn't seem to understand. Now, Who are they? Well, I've given some hints. And I'm going to leave it at that. I've named their prophet. I've talked about their beliefs. I'm not going to explain how I know. I just do. And quite frankly, I'm less than impressed. However, they are also very much a separatist group. They believe themselves to largely be not of this nation, at the same time, they believe themselves to somehow be part of the government. And no, it doesn't work like that. In many respects, they're much like what you might call the sovereign citizen movement. They declare their own nationality and they go out of their way to break from having a Social Security or taxpayer identification number. They are, in that regards, very much a separatist group. And they are, but also, as far as I'm concerned, based upon their own texts, based upon how they speak about other groups, very much racist. And like I said, if you've seen my forklift theology DNA and DNA update videos, you understand why I might say that. And again, like I said, 1% isn't much. Most groups would probably reject it. And fair enough. I don't really give it much thought to begin with. Then again, I'm not some whiny teenager who is looking for oppression points. I'm an old man who is just sick and tired of the world around him. I'd rather people be a little bit more honest, you know? Stop lying to this group. You know who you are. You're wrong. Your prophet's wrong. Your temple's wrong. I don't know what you're going to do. You can continue to lie. You probably will. I can't stop that. All I can say is, very honestly, I've given the evidence. I've pointed out the facts. We have no record of your group being around 10,000 years ago. We have no record of your flag actually existing prior to your prophet. And then you've lied about your terms. You lied. Now, there are a lot of religions out there, okay? A lot of them. I mean, seriously, you got Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. That said, there are religions that are based on some pretty weird stuff. But most of them, there's some truth behind their beliefs. Not this time, though. Like I said, dangerous. It is dangerous for a religion to link itself to events in history. But the only two religions that have done it, and done it successfully, Judaism, Christianity. And we're not afraid of outside sources. We're not afraid of hostile witnesses. After all, they often echo what we've been saying. Now, choice is yours. personally. I'm just getting this out there, helping people to hear that it's there. Speaking the truth, no matter how ugly it is. I no longer care. I've done my part. I just pray, very honestly, that this will be exposed for what it really is. I'm not a fan of racism. I'm not a fan of lies. And I'm not a fan of seeing history distorted in an attempt to prove something that wasn't there. Confirmation bias is a headache. Honest scholars hate it, and rightly so. How about a little more honesty? What do you think? Like I said, I don't really have any scripture to this, and it's probably better that way. I've said what I've said, and that's really all there is to it. Have a good evening.